Hi, my name's Sheehan and today I'd like to talk about The Godfather Part 2. I'd like to go through this 1974 film directed by Francis Ford Coppola and look at how the film is put together in terms of its narrative structure, as well as looking at some of the themes that crop up in the course of this famous film. Now, of course, the original film, based on the novel by Mario Puzo, was a justly revered film. I mean, it was amazing. And, the second instalment had a lot to live up to. And it is a terrific film, an amazing achievement like the first one. And I guess what's really clever about Godfather Part 2 is the fact that it really tells two stories. And it does this in an incredibly elegant and ingenious way. You'd expect this to be a cumbersome affair over such a long film, but it isn't like that at all. We basically have the story of the young Vito Corleone, who of course was played by Marlon Brando in his older years in the first film. This part of the film describes Vito's journey from Sicily after his family was murdered to New York, him falling into a life of crime and then becoming the most powerful mafia don in the area. And then in tandem with that we have the story of Vito's son Michael, who after killing the heads of the five families in the end of the last film, he now is trying to consolidate his power and to assassinate a highly powerful rival who has tried to assassinate him. So we have two stories in this film, both fascinating stories, both brilliantly acted, both from the same family but a generation apart. And it's ingenious how the film is structured really in 5 acts. I mean, but when I say 5 acts, I mean 5 acts for for Vito's story and 5 acts for Michael's story. So you have Act 1 Vito, Act 1 Michael, and so on. It's extremely clever, beautifully done. So the film essentially, as I said, switches between Vito's young life and then Michael's life. And I'll take Vito first. Vito is this young boy in Sicily, in Corleone, his family town, and his father, his brother, and eventually his mother are murdered. And Vito is hidden and he escapes to America, and you have that amazing shot of all the immigrants looking at the Statue of Liberty. And then in Act 2 of this story, Vito is entered into the criminal world within the Italian community in New York City. There's this mafia don, Fanucci, who kind of terrorizes the local businesses, etc. And Vito experiences him, but also has to look after these guns which belong to Clemenza, who of course we know from the first film. And then in Act 3, Vito, in this amazing scene where we have a Catholic procession through the streets with the Blessed Virgin, and there's a fair, there's this kind of fair stalls all around, a hive of activity, and in the midst of this, Vito, who has to pay Fanucci some money, he murders him, and it's from there that Vito becomes the chief don in the area. And then in Act 4, Vito gains influence. He becomes very much a pillar of the community, albeit a slightly sinister one, I guess. But people begin to fear him, he has a run-in with this landlord, and then the landlord realises who he is, and we also get a sense of Vito's getting wealthier and having more power. And it's worth saying that we also see much of Vito's wife and his young children, who of course we know grow up to be Sonny, Fredo and Michael. Then the last act of Vito's story, Act 5, he goes back to Sicily and he has vengeance on the local mafia chief who killed his family. And you know, in an unforgettable scene, he kind of stabs him and drags the knife across his body. And then that's Vito's story. Michael's story, again in 5 acts, is more complicated. In Act 1, we're at Michael's son's first Holy Communion party, and it's a lavish affair. There's, of course, now they're based in Nevada, and there's this bandstand, a band are playing, there's much music, jollity, drunkenness, and it's here we see all the old characters from the first film a few years later, with the exception of Clemenza, who's now dead, but he's replaced by Pantangeli, who's this hilariously larger than life underworld character who's a central person in this film. And it's here we meet also Senator Geary, who's this very dark and sinister yet charming, on the surface charming politician who hates Michael and his family, but wants to kind of gain some of their money through an underhand deal. Michael wants to buy more casinos, and Senator Geary is hoping would help him with this, but Senator Geary isn't going to help. And then finally Michael, there's an attempt on his life, an assassination attempt, which spurs Michael on for the rest of the film. Who is behind this, and what must he do to protect him and his family? Then in Act 2 we meet the chief villain, I guess, of the film, Hyman Roth. Hyman Roth is an old friend of Michael's father, but now he's an extremely powerful figure who wants to set up hotels and casinos in Cuba, in Havana, and he wants Michael on board. But Michael's beginning to suspect Hyman Roth, that it's him who wants him killed. So Michael's playing along with Hyman Roth, but Pantangeli has been asked to give away some of his power, of his family, to the Risotto brothers, who are under Hyman Roth's sway, and that causes added friction. Michael witnesses much in Havana, these extremely powerful people, extreme wealth, but also the poverty and political unrest of the country, and he's beginning to realise that investing in Cuba might be a bad idea, and he's reluctant to give over the money Hyman Roth wants, but also he knows that Hyman Roth wants him dead. In Act 3, Michael returns back home to America, but it's here we realise that Michael's in trouble. There's a court case against him. People want to convict him of his role as the Godfather in a criminal family, and they're relying on the testimony of Pantangeli, who has escaped his own assassination attempt, to really drop Michael in it. But then in Act 4, Michael gets his chance in court, and he manages, through the intervention of Pantangeli's brother from Sicily, who he greatly fears. Pantangeli changes his story and doesn't testify against Michael after all, so the case collapses. But then Michael realises that he needs to get his revenge. And earlier on in the film, when things go wrong in Cuba, Michael tries to get Hyman Roth assassinated. That goes wrong. Michael learns that Fredo was working with Hyman Roth with the assassination attempt at the beginning of the film, which of course breaks Michael's heart. And it's at the end of the film where Michael finally gets his revenge and Fredo is killed on a fishing boat just after he prays the Hail Mary. And we're left with Michael at the end of the film, a rather cold, distant figure. And it's worth saying also, of course, that he's lost his family. Kay has had enough of him. Michael's not paid her any attention. She's had an abortion, which horrifies Michael. And but Michael's taken the kids from her. So The Godfather Part 2 is really, it really turns Michael into this cold, calculating, quite, in a way, terrifying figure. You know, there's nothing he wouldn't do for the family, and he'd commit any acts of violence to avenge wrongs done to him and the family. And there's something of the coldness of in his eyes, like a shark's eyes maybe, throughout this film, which of course we see at the end of the first film, but it's definitely consolidated in this film. Now, of course, the film has got tremendous performance by Robert De Niro as the young Vito, Al Pacino again as Michael, and it really is an incredibly dark but intriguing and fascinating film. Perhaps one to give it a few watches before you completely understand it. It's harder to interpret than the first film, but it is a terrific follow-up to the original Godfather. So like the earlier film, you know, it shares many of the same themes of power, holding on to power, of murder, of revenge. Revenge is a big part of this film, both for Michael and Vito. Of course, Sicily, New York, the American dream, of course. You know, these immigrants going to America and seeing the Statue of Liberty, such a potent symbol of the American dream. And again, it carries on this theme which we have in the first film of the sacraments of, you know, Catholicism. We have Holy Communion in Godfather Part 2. We've had a wedding in the first film, a baptism in the first film, now Holy Communion. And I guess the funerals are in a sense an extension of the last rites. And in the third film we have a confession, so, you know, an ordination actually as well. So most of it's very Catholic, you know, the kind of the cultural backdrop to these films. Of course, there's a lot about Cuba, about greed and about big business. But it really is, you know, a terrific film and definitely a worthy follow-up to the first Godfather film. Thank you for watching, and please check out the slideshow afterwards. Bye.